Chapter 1. The War. In 1757, in the northeast part of New York State, the English and the French were fighting over who would one day control the land. The forests around this area were filled with danger. There were enemy soldiers everywhere. Also, the Indians, who knew the land very well, were either very friendly or extremely dangerous. Everybody in Fort Edward, an English fortress built on the northern part of the Hudson River, was very busy. One day, an Indian called Magua arrived there from Fort Henry to see General Webb. General Webb was a short, powerful man with white hair and a white beard. He wore a row of medals across his chest. The long yellow coat of his uniform was down to his knees, and it almost touched his black riding boots. Major Hayward saluted him and began to speak.
General Webb, the Indian here has news from Colonel Monroe. The French are moving south towards Fort Henry. Colonel Monroe is asking for more men.
Well, I need men myself. We have no protection on either the east or the west.
Perhaps I can take 1,000 men with me. We'll push the French back to the west away from Fort Henry and then come back.
The Indian Magua was silent the whole time. His face was painted in red, white and yellow war paint. He looked completely different from Major Hayward. The Major was tall, with curly blonde hair and a handsome face. The Indian was small, with a bald head and a long black ponytail. General Webb looked at the Indian suspiciously.
All right, take 1,000 men with you in the morning, but the moment you reach Colonel Monroe and you fight off the French, I want you to send a message to announce your return.
Yes, sir.
General Webb was about to return to his tent when Major Hayward began to speak again.
General Webb, sir, there's one more thing. The Colonel asked us to bring him his daughters.
Just then, they could hear women laughing. The two officers and the Indian all turned towards a tent where two women were washing clothes. The tall one, with long black hair and darker skin, was Cora, Colonel Monroe's elder daughter. She held a basket full of clothes. The younger sister, Alice, was a small blonde girl with rosy cheeks, and she was hanging the clothes up to dry.
I don't want them to travel with the troops. It's too dangerous.
Major Hayward, who could not stop looking at Alice, had another idea.
Why don't Magua and I take them separately through the forest? We will be safe with him. And it's much harder to see 4 people traveling through the forest than it is to see 1,000.
The general agreed to the idea, and the Indian smiled in an evil way. Chapter 2. Danger in the Forest. It was still daytime when Major Hayward, Alice, Cora and Magua left Fort Edward, but the sky was grey. When they entered the thick forest, it was so dark that it seemed like night. Hayward and the women rode horses while Magua walked. The forest was filled with terrible animal cries, and it was getting darker. Magua heard something in the bushes. He stopped the horses and took out his knife. He pulled back the leaves of a tree, and there they saw David Gammott, the foolish church singer who always sang on Sundays at Fort Edward.
David, what are you doing here?
Major Hayward was glad Gammott was not an enemy.
I came here to sing. Nature is the perfect place to hear music. But I'm afraid my horse doesn't agree with me.
Gammott was a tall, thin man who was sitting on a white horse wearing a funny green hat. He played a small handmade pipe.
Well, you can't stay out here. Our troops are going to Fort Henry. We're going there too. Why don't you come with us?
I'd be delighted. How about a song?
Magua said something under his breath.
Not just now, David.
So the small party was now made up of 5, and they continued on their way through the thick forest. They didn't know where they were. Magua decided to have a look around.
You stay here. I go to mountain. Look, see where we go.
Hayward and the others stayed behind.
Now, how about a song?
Gamut played his pipe. Major Hayward thought he heard a sound.
Gamut, stop it!
2 Indians and a white man dressed in animal skins came out from behind the trees. One of the Indians wasn't wearing many clothes, and he had war paint all over his body. The other 2 wore animal fur hats and deerskin jackets. The white man held a rifle.
Who are you?
I'm Major Duncan Hayward of the King's 60th Regiment at Fort William Henry.
The white man smiled at the way Hayward spoke.
And who brought you here?
Hayward looked annoyed.
I'm afraid our Indian doesn't know this forest.
Did you say Indian?
Yes, he's a Huron, and he's around here somewhere.
The white man said something to his Indian friends, and they disappeared into the forest.
I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait here. I want to see this Indian of yours.
People didn't usually trust Indians who helped the white soldiers. Hayward, Gamut, Alice and Cora waited as the white man with the rifle disappeared into the trees behind them. Suddenly, they heard a loud Indian scream, then a gunshot. Chapter 3. The Iroquois Indians attack. The name of the white man was Hawkeye, and he lived in the forest with 2 Mohican Indians. He had lived all his life with the Mohicans, but now there were only 2 Mohicans left in the world, Chingachgook, the Indian in war paint, and Uncas, his son. When Hawkeye and the Mohicans saw Magua in the forest, Magua threw his tomahawk at them. Hawkeye fired his rifle, but only hit him on the arm as he ran away. Hawkeye told Major Hayward that Magua was a dangerous Indian and that they should not trust him. He said he would take them to Fort Henry in the morning because the forest was dangerous at night. It was getting dark, and they heard the sounds of wolves howling. Major Hayward agreed that they should find somewhere safe to stay for the night. They tied the horses to some trees and went up the river in their canoes to the Mohicans' secret hiding place. It was a cave underneath a big waterfall. The sound of the falling water all around was so loud outside the cave's entrance that it was hard for them to hear each other.
Uncas, take everyone inside, and I'll get us something to eat.
Cora's dark hair and skin made her look more like an Indian than an Englishwoman. Uncas offered her his hand to help her over the difficult rocks, and she smiled and accepted politely. Major Hayward helped Alice, and soon they were all inside a large cave where there were tunnels leading to other caves.
It's cold in here.
Major Hayward took off his army coat and put it around young Alice's shoulders. The Mohicans began to make a fire.
This is one place where I do not feel like singing a song.
Mr. Gamut, why do you sing all the time?
Cora, singing is a man's greatest gift to himself. He can express his feelings and create music at the same time.
Hawkeye appeared at the entrance of the cave. He had a strange look on his face.
Iroquois.
It was only one word, but the Mohicans immediately took out their knives.
Major, take the women to the back of the cave. There are beds behind that wall.
The Major did what Hawkeye said. Alice whispered in his ear.
Duncan, I'm afraid.
Don't worry, Alice. I won't let anything happen to you.
While Hayward was behind the wall at the back of the cave, he heard gunshots and wild Indian yells at the front. He looked out and saw Hawkeye, Chingachgook and Uncas fighting hand to hand with a group of Iroquois Indians. Gamut was on the ground and his leg was bleeding. Hayward took out his gun and ran to the front of the cave. An Iroquois jumped on his back and they started fighting. They fell to the ground. The Iroquois had one hand round Hayward's neck, and with the other he raised his knife to kill him. Then Uncas kicked the Indian hard, and he fell into the water below. Hawkeye, the Mohicans and Hayward fought off the Iroquois, but the Indians stole their canoes and they could not escape. More Indians climbed down both sides of the rock near the cave.
We have no more gunpowder. They'll be here in a few minutes.
What shall we do?
Cora came out from behind the back wall. She had heard what Hawkeye and Hayward had been saying.
Jump into the water. They'll follow you and we'll be saved. They don't know we're here.
It was a dangerous plan, but the Mohicans knew she was right.
I go, Hawkeye.
Chingachgook jumped.
Hayward, you and Gamut will stay with the women. If you see any Iroquois, kill them. You don't want to know what they will do to you if they capture you.
Hawkeye jumped into the waterfall and disappeared in the water below. Uncas did not move. Cora spoke to him softly.
Aren't you going?
I stay here.
Cora knew that he was doing that for her. She did not want him to die for her, and she thought he could help them only if he left.
Please, find my father. Bring him here. For me.
She squeezed his hand and looked deeply into his eyes. Uncas did not need anything more. He let out a loud Indian cry and jumped into the waterfall.